What if I told you that Wells Fargo didn't just create 3.5 million fake accounts? What if that scandal, the one that made headlines, the one Congress pretended to care about, was just one tool in a 15-year machine designed to extract billions from black families? A machine so efficient, so well-calibrated, that even when they were caught red-handed, their CEO, John Stump, resigned in disgrace, yet walked away with a $130 million payday. And not a single executive went to jail. Because this wasn't about a few bad employees. It was about a system, a financial engine, built to target the most vulnerable, milk them dry, and move on. To understand how it worked, you have to see the machine for what it really was. 3 conveyor belts, 3 eras of greed, all feeding one another. 2004 to 2009, the predatory loan trap. 2011 to 2015, the fake accounts that destroyed credit. 2020 to today, the algorithmic redlining disguised as progress. Each phase was deliberate. Each phase targeted black wealth. Each phase made Wells Fargo richer. This is a story of how America's most trusted bank became a silent weapon against black families and how its leaders got rewarded for it. Phase 1. The predatory loan trap, 2004 to 2009. The story starts in the mid-2000s, when the housing market looked like the American dream on steroids. Everyone wanted in. Home ownership was supposed to be the great equalizer, the key to generational wealth. But for Wells Fargo, it was something else entirely. Internally, they called it growing the book. Externally, it looked like opportunity. But inside, it was a carefully crafted trap. Loan officers were given one unspoken directive: steer black and Latino borrowers into high-interest subprime loans, even when they qualified for safer, cheaper prime mortgages. On paper, it sounded absurd. Why would a family with good credit, say a 660 or 680 score, get pushed into a subprime loan with 8% interest when a white borrower with the same profile got 5%? Because Wells Fargo made more money that way. Every subprime loan carried higher fees, bigger commissions, and bigger profits. And the people paying the price were families in neighborhoods like Baltimore, Atlanta, and Cleveland, where the dream of owning a home had finally become possible. One former loan officer blew the whistle, describing how black borrowers were called mud people inside the branch offices. Another said managers referred to the subprime loans as ghetto loans. It wasn't just racism. It was strategy. They targeted churches, using trusted pastors to refer members to Wells Fargo for affordable housing. They held homeownership seminars that promised financial freedom, but ended in predatory contracts. By 2009, over 750,000 black and Latino borrowers had been funneled into subprime deals. And when the housing bubble burst, these were the first families to lose their homes. The fallout was devastating. Black home ownership rates plunged to levels not seen since the 1960s. Families lost generational homes, properties their grandparents had built. But here's the dark part: Wells Fargo didn't lose. When those homes were foreclosed, the bank got paid from government bailouts, insurance payouts, and the resale of seized properties. They made money coming and going. In 2012, the Department of Justice fined Wells Fargo $175 million for discriminatory lending. That sounds like justice, until you realize that same year, their net profit was over $19 billion. Executives kept their bonuses. Nobody went to prison. And black wealth in America lost hundreds of billions overnight. Phase 1 had done its job. It extracted assets, destroyed homeownership, and created a new pool of vulnerable customers, people desperate to rebuild their credit, which is exactly what the next phase was designed to exploit. Phase 2, the credit score destruction, 2011 to 2015. If Phase 1 was about taking homes, Phase 2 was about taking trust. By 2011, the housing crisis had faded from the headlines. Wells Fargo rebranded itself as America's Community Bank. Smiling commercials promised redemption. But behind closed doors, the same toxic pressure culture that fueled the subprime crisis had evolved into something even more dangerous. It started with sales quotas. Employees were told to sell at least 8 products per household: checking accounts, credit cards, savings accounts, you name it. 8 is great, management said. But here's the problem. Most customers didn't need 8 products. Some barely needed 2. So branch workers started cheating, opening accounts without permission, signing customers up for credit cards they never requested, even creating fake email addresses to meet their sales goals. Between 2011 and 2015, Wells Fargo employees created 3.5 million fake accounts. But this wasn't a random, across-the-board issue. Black and low-income customers were hit hardest. They were more likely to be targeted for add-on products they didn't authorize. They were more likely to be charged overdraft fees when those accounts went negative. And they were more likely to see their credit scores destroyed when unpaid fees went collections. Imagine trying to rebuild your life after losing your home, only to find out your bank, the same bank that sold you the bad mortgage, just tanked your credit without you knowing it. You couldn't buy a car. You couldn't rent an apartment. Your score, your financial identity, was weaponized against you, and Wells Fargo profited again. They collected billions in overdraft fees, maintenance fees, and penalties from accounts people never opened. By the time regulators caught on, the damage was irreversible. The scandal broke in 2016. The CEO, John Stumpf, went before Congress. He apologized. He took full responsibility. And then he quietly retired with a $130 million exit package. The board called it a clawback. The public called it theft. No handcuffs. No trial. Just a golden parachute. Meanwhile, low-level employees, mostly tellers and branch managers, were fired, blamed for a culture they didn't create. Black customers were left with ruined credit and no compensation for years of discrimination. The machine had evolved. It didn't just extract money. It extracted trust. And while regulators patted themselves on the back, Wells Fargo began Phase 3, the digital upgrade. Because when you automate the discrimination, you make it untouchable. Phase 3, the algorithmic gatekeeping, 2020 present. By 2020, Wells Fargo had a new slogan, rebuilding trust one customer at a time. They promised to fix their culture. They promised diversity. They promised transparency. But in the background, something familiar was happening again, this time hidden inside code. A report surfaced showing that Wells Fargo's mortgage approval algorithm was quietly discriminating against black applicants. Data from 2020 showed that only 47% of black homeowners who applied for refinancing were approved, compared to 72% of white applicants. This wasn't about creditworthiness. Black applicants with 750-plus credit scores were being denied, while white applicants with 680 were approved. The reason? The machine had gone digital. Algorithms trained on decades of biased lending data were now making the decisions. Instead of racist loan officers, you had objective computer models, but the results were exactly the same. It's what researchers call digital redlining. Back in the 1930s, banks literally drew red lines around black neighborhoods on maps to deny them loans. Now, the lines are digital, embedded in code that prioritizes risk profiles that just happen to penalize black families. Wells Fargo denied the accusations, of course. They blamed market conditions. They blamed data anomalies. But the numbers didn't lie. Black applicants were more than 3 times as likely to be denied for mortgages compared to white applicants with the same income and debt profiles. And even when approved, they were charged higher rates and closing costs. This is an ancient history. This is today. The lawsuit is ongoing. The algorithms are still running. And black home ownership in America in 2025 is lower than it was in 1968, the year Martin Luther King Jr. was assassinated. Think about that. Half a century of progress, erased by software. And yet Wells Fargo stock price? Still climbing. Their executives? Still collecting bonuses. Their brand? Still America's most trusted bank. The machine didn't stop. It just got smarter, quieter, and harder to catch. So, let's review what happens when you steal in America. If you're a poor black man who takes $100 from a convenience store, you get 5 years in prison. If you're a corporate executive who orchestrates a 15-year fraud machine that steals billions from black families, you get to retire with $130 million and a yacht. That's not just hypocrisy. That's design. Because in America, Crime isn't about what you do. It's about who you are when you do it. When Wells Fargo's executives built their wealth extraction machine, every phase, every scheme, was dressed in the language of business. They didn't need masks or guns. They had boardrooms and PowerPoints. And when the system caught up with them, it protected them. That's what makes this story so infuriating. The machine wasn't hidden. It was documented, investigated, and even confessed, but nothing truly changed. Let's start at the top. John Stumps, the CEO during the fake accounts era, resigned in 2016, accepting responsibility. His punishment? Retiring with a $130 million package in stock and options. Carrie Tolstedt, the executive who oversaw the retail banking division where the fake account scandal began, walked away with $125 million in compensation before regulators even acted. When she was finally charged years later, it wasn't for systemic discrimination or wealth theft. It was for obstructing regulators. A technicality. The same way the law punished Martha Stewart, not for insider trading, but for lying about it. Meanwhile, 5 other senior executives collectively left with more than $400 million in exit payouts. That's $500 million of reward for a scandal that destroyed millions of lives. To put that into perspective, if a low-income family lost their home during the subprime phase, they lost maybe $80,000 in value. Wells Fargo's leaders made 5,000 times that by engineering the system that took it. No one went to prison. No one faced felony charges. No one was personally fined in proportion to their profit. Why? Because financial crime at that level doesn't get prosecuted. It gets negotiated. Let's flip the frame. While executives sailed off into retirement, families across Baltimore, Detroit, and Chicago were still trying to recover. Many had never missed a payment before the crisis. Their only mistake was trusting a brand that told them they belonged in the American dream. For Black homeowners, the Wells Fargo crisis didn't just erase wealth. It erased history. Homes that had been in family for generations were foreclosed and resold to developers. Neighborhoods that once symbolized progress became symbols of loss. And the financial wounds never healed because they were designed not to. When you lose a home, your credit collapses. When your credit collapses, your options shrink. And when your options shrink, the system finds new ways to profit from your desperation. Payday loans, car title loans, rent-to-own scams, all feeding the same economic hierarchy. It's a perfect cycle. Wells Fargo's first phase stole homes. The second phase destroyed credit. The third phase used algorithms to make sure those same families could never re-enter the housing market. That's not an accident. That's continuity. The machine never stopped running. It just got better at hiding. Every few years, Wells Fargo launches another rebranding campaign, a new slogan, a new promise, rebuilding trust, reimagining banking. They issue statements about diversity, inclusion, equity. They post commercials featuring Black employees smiling under slogans like "Together, we rise." But behind those smiles, the math doesn't change. From 2004 to 2024, Wells Fargo has paid over $7 billion in fines and settlements, more than any other American bank for misconduct. And yet, in the same period, they've made over $200 billion in profit. Fines aren't justice. They're transaction costs. For a corporation like Wells Fargo, corruption isn't a risk. It's a line item. They treat settlements like we treat parking tickets. Just the cost of doing business. And regulators? They issue press releases, declare victory, and move on until the next scandal. Because in America, the people who write the laws are funded by the same corporations that break them. When Black families lost their homes, the narrative was financial irresponsibility. When Wells Fargo lost its reputation, the narrative was a few bad apples. That's how the system reframes guilt. It personalizes poverty but abstracts greed. If you're poor and you make a mistake, it's a moral failure. If you're rich and you commit fraud, it's a systemic issue. Wells Fargo's story isn't unique. It's just the most blatant. But it reveals something deeper about America's economy. It's not just a system of profit. It's a system of extraction. And extraction always needs a target. For centuries, that target has been Black labor, black property, and black wealth. From slavery to redlining to subprime loans to algorithmic bias. The players change, but the playbook doesn't. The only difference is that today, the overseer wears a suit and the whip is a credit score. You might think that after all this exposure, the documentaries, the lawsuits, the outrage, things would change. But in 2023, Wells Fargo was still facing fresh discrimination suits. Black homeowners were still being denied refinances at double the rate of whites. And in internal memos, the bank was still finding new risk assessment models that just happened to correlate with race and income. It's not just a Wells Fargo problem. It's a system problem. The machine exists in every major institution that profits from inequality: banks, insurers, tech companies, even universities. Each one extracts something: data, labor, hope, and each one tells you it's for your own good. That's how the machine survives. Let's step back for a second. Imagine you're a black homeowner in 2007. You've worked 20 years for this moment. You've saved, sacrificed, skipped vacations, worked 2 jobs, all for that house. Then a friendly Wells Fargo rep offers you a custom loan package that sounds too good to be true. You trust them because why wouldn't you? They're one of the biggest banks in the country. 3 years later, the economy crashes, your payments skyrocket, and you lose your home. You move into an apartment, hoping to rebuild. A few years later, you try to open a new account, only to learn that your credit is ruined because Wells Fargo opened accounts in your name that you never authorized. You try again in 2021. You've rebuilt your score, you've worked hard. But this time, the computer says no. The algorithm flags you as high risk. 15 years, 3 systems, 1 outcome. You never get your house back. You never build equity again. And your children inherit debt instead of wealth. That's not just bad luck. That's structural theft. So what do we call it when one America can destroy lives and profit from it, while the other America goes to prison for survival crimes? We call it justice. At least, that's what the system calls it. Because if Wells Fargo had been a single person, if John Stumpf had been a small-time loan shark instead of a CEO, he'd be serving multiple life sentences. But because it was a corporation, it gets to pay a fine and move on. Corporations are people when it's convenient, when they want free speech and political influence. But they're not people when it comes to punishment. And that's the paradox of modern capitalism: responsibility without accountability, profit without consequence, power without justice. So when people ask why the racial wealth gap still exists, why black home ownership is at historic lows, or why trust in banks has collapsed, the answer is simple: because the system works exactly as designed. The Wells Fargo scandal wasn't a malfunction. It was a demonstration, a test run for how far you can push exploitation before anyone fights back. And when they were caught, nothing happened. No jail time, no criminal convictions, no restructuring of the system. Just new slogans and new algorithms. That's the brilliance of the machine. It doesn't need to hide anymore. It thrives in plain sight, powered by apathy and protected by complexity. So the next time someone tells you that America is a land of equal opportunity, ask them this: why does a punishment for stealing billions depend on your LinkedIn title? The next time someone says a wealth gap is about personal responsibility, show them this story, because you can't fix what you refuse to see. And now you've seen it. You've seen how a bank that called itself trusted became a predator. You've seen how its leaders cashed out while its victims were silenced. And you've seen how justice in America has 2 lanes, one paved with privilege and one paved with punishment. So no, Wells Fargo didn't just create fake accounts. They built a 15-year machine to strip wealth, destroy credit, and digitize discrimination. And when the smoke cleared, their CEO walked away with $130 million. That's the game. And it's rigged. If you want more dark truths the news won't touch, hit that like button, share this video, and subscribe. Because knowing the game is the first step to beating it.